The morning Kezia Voss almost turned away the man who would change her life. It was raining so hard the gutters on Jasper Avenue were running like rivers. She hadn't slept well. She never did on Sundays because Monday meant the early shift at Birchwood Clinic. The walk-in on the edge of Edmonton's river valley that smelled like floor cleaner and old coffee, and, on bad days, something that made her think of her mother's last hospital room. She tried not to think about that. Kezia was 28, though most people guessed younger, which she didn't take as a compliment the way some women did. She'd been a medical receptionist for 3 years, ever since she'd had to drop out of her nursing program in the second year. Not because she failed, but because her mother got sick, and someone had to be home, and someone had to pay rent, and her brother Darnell was 17 and couldn't do either. She'd told herself it was temporary. That was 3 years ago. She liked her job well enough. She liked the regulars, Mr. Okafor, who came every 2 weeks and always brought her a packet of Tim Hortons Timbits from the one on 124th, and little Rosalind, who was 6 and terrified of needles but brave about it in a way that broke Kezia's heart a little every time. She liked feeling useful. She did not like her supervisor, Dana, who scheduled her for the opening shift 4 out of 5 days a week, and took credit for Kezia's suggestion about the new appointment reminder system without mentioning her name once. But that's not the part of the story that matters. What matters is that, on that particular Monday morning in October, with the rain hammering the clinic's flat roof and the heat still not working properly, the door opened at 7:52 a.m. 8 minutes before they were officially open, and a man walked in who looked like he'd been sleeping in his car. His jacket was an old canvas thing, the kind you got at surplus stores, and it was soaked through at the shoulders. He had a backpack on, not a nice one, not the expensive North Face kind, just a faded green pack with a broken side zipper held shut with a carabiner. His boots were good, she noticed, which struck her as odd, but she noticed things like that because her mother had taught her that shoes told you more about a person than their face did. His face was unshaven in a way that didn't look intentional. He had dark circles under his eyes. He stood at the door for a moment like he wasn't sure he'd come to the right place. Kezia looked up from the intake forms she was sorting. "We're not technically open yet," she said, and then immediately felt bad about it because he looked exhausted. "But come in out of the rain, you can wait." He came in. He didn't say thank you right away, which she noticed too. He sat in the chair closest to the door and set the pack between his feet and just sat there. Not on his phone, not fidgeting, just looking at the floor. Like someone who had run out of whatever had been keeping him going. Kezia finished sorting the form. Then she got up, went to the back, poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot Dana always made too weak, brought one out and set it on the small table next to him. "It's not great coffee," she said, "but it's hot." He looked up. His eyes were gray, which she hadn't expected somehow. "Thank you," he said. And the way he said it, like he was slightly surprised someone had done it, stuck with her for reasons she couldn't explain. His name, he told her when she asked for registration, was Cole Whitmore. She typed it in. Reason for visit. Fatigue, insomnia, hadn't seen a doctor in a while. She didn't comment on that. She asked the standard questions in the standard order, and he answered them quietly. And without the slightly defensive edge a lot of people got when answering medical questions, which she'd always found interesting. The people who were clearly unwell often got defensive, as if illness were an accusation. Cole did not seem defensive. He seemed like a man who had simply decided to stop pretending he was fine. When the doctor called him 40 minutes later, he picked up his pack, then paused and looked back at her. "The coffee was good," he said. It wasn't, and they both knew it, and she found herself almost smiling as he disappeared through the door. She thought about him for the rest of the day, which annoyed her. She had things to think about. Her rent was going up in January. Her brother was talking about going back to school, and she was trying to figure out if she could help him with it. She had a list. Cole Whitmore was not on the list. He came back on Thursday. This time he wasn't soaking wet, and she could see him more clearly. He was tall. She hadn't registered that the first time, because he'd been sitting. Maybe 35, she thought. Hard to say exactly. He was wearing the same canvas jacket, cleaner this time, and different jeans, and he'd shaved. Not completely, but enough that he looked less like he'd been living outdoors. He sat down and she thought, that's not someone who's homeless. She wasn't sure why she'd briefly thought he might be. Something about the first visit, maybe. Or something about the way he held himself, which was very still, very contained, like a person who was used to not taking up much space. which, she would later learn, was almost comedically at odds with who he actually was. Same doctor, she asked, if possible. She booked him in. Dr. Nwachukwu was running 15 minutes behind, she told him. He said that was fine. And then, because she'd been thinking about him on and off for 3 days, and was tired of being subtle about things she was curious about, she said, "Are you doing better than Monday?" He looked at her. It was a considering sort of look, not unfriendly, just measuring. "A bit," he said. "Hard to say." "Fair enough," she said. He sat. She worked. "About 10 minutes in," he said. "Do you always give patients coffee?" "Only the ones who look like they need it," she said, without looking up. A pause. Then, "Is that in the job description?" "Probably not." Another pause. And then, very quietly, almost like he wasn't sure he was saying it out loud, "Thank you for the other day. I was having a bad week." Kezia looked up then. He was looking at the window, not at her. And there was something in his expression that made her think of the way Darnell used to look when he was 16, and their mother first got sick, and he was trying very hard to be okay about it and not quite managing. "Everyone gets bad weeks," she said. "Some people don't let it show. That's usually not as impressive as they think it is." That made him turn and look at her. And she had the sense, for the first time, that she'd surprised him. Like he wasn't used to people just saying things, straight things, unpolished. Dr. Nwachukwu called him in. He left. But he booked a follow-up before he went, and this time the appointment was in 2 weeks, and something about that sat warm and slightly inconvenient in Kezia's chest for the rest of the afternoon. She didn't tell anyone about him. There was nothing to tell. He was a patient. She was a receptionist. That was all. Except it wasn't really, and she knew that, and she filed it under the category of things she would deal with later. Later came faster than she expected. On a Tuesday in November, her car, a 2009 Civic that she'd babied through 4 Canadian winters and 2 sets of replacement brakes, finally gave out 3 blocks from the clinic. She was standing on the sidewalk in the cold, trying to figure out if the towing fee would eat her grocery budget for the week, when a familiar canvas jacket came around the corner. Cole Whitmore stopped walking when he saw her. "Car trouble," he said. "Observant," she said. She wasn't in the mood. "I can drive you," he said. "I'm parked on 100th. She almost said no. She had a whole system for not accepting things from people she didn't know well, built up over years of being the person in her family who everyone else relied on, and who had therefore learned early that accepting help came with invisible costs. But it was -12 and the tow truck wasn't coming for another 40 minutes, and her fingers were going numb. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." His car was not what she expected. She didn't know much about cars specifically, but she knew the difference between a car that was just clean and a car that was expensive. And his was both. Black, sleek, the kind of interior that had real leather and screens she wasn't sure what to do with. She sat in the passenger seat and didn't comment on it, and he didn't offer an explanation. He drove her to the clinic. Then, she hadn't asked, it just happened. He drove her home afterward because her car was still at the mechanic's, and she'd been looking up transit routes on her phone, and he'd seen her doing it. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he said. He said it the same way she'd said that's usually not as impressive as they think it is, like it was just true, and that was enough. On the way, they talked. Actually talked for the first time, because they were stuck in end-of-day traffic on White Avenue, and there was nowhere else to go. She told him about Darnell and the school thing. He listened in a way that most people didn't, not waiting for his turn, actually listening. He asked what Darnell wanted to study. She said mechanical engineering, and Cole said that was hard to get into, and she said she knew, and that Darnell was smart enough, but his grades in his first year had been uneven because of their mother, and that she was trying to figure out if there was a way to explain that to an admissions committee without it sounding like an excuse. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It's not an excuse, it's context. Admissions committees don't always see the difference. Some do." She looked at him. "Do you know much about university admissions?" He seemed to find something slightly complicated about that question. "A bit," he said. She left it there. She had a policy about not pushing people into corners they weren't ready to come out of. He dropped her off in front of her building. A 6-story walk-up in Garneau, not the nicest block on the street, but not the worst either. She said thank you. He said drive safe, which she pointed out she couldn't do because her car was at the mechanic, and he looked briefly like he was suppressing a smile. She went inside. She stood in her hallway with her coat still on and thought, I like him. That was inconvenient. Over the next 3 weeks, he came into the clinic 4 more times, Once for the follow-up, 3 times for things that, she was privately beginning to think, might have been reasons to come in rather than reasons to come in. A sore knee that she thought should have gone to a sports medicine clinic. A question about whether he needed a flu shot that could have been answered by the public health website. A request to update his contact information, which had taken approximately 3 minutes, and which he had somehow turned into a 30-minute conversation about whether the transit redesign in the River Valley was going to work out. She wasn't complaining. She was just noticing. He asked her once what she did on her days off. She told him about the free skating at Victoria Park on Sunday mornings, and how she and Darnell went sometimes, and how she always felt like a kid again when she was on the ice, which she didn't usually admit to people. He'd written something down on his phone after that. She'd noticed but hadn't said anything. She was starting to realize that Cole Whitmore was a person who paid very close attention to things, but who revealed very little about himself in return. Not in a calculating way, or at least it didn't feel calculated. More like someone who had gotten so used to being treated a certain way that he'd learned to make himself small around people he actually liked, in case that changed things. She could relate to that, a little. She just expressed it differently. She found out who he was on a Friday morning, and not from him. Dana, her supervisor, came in at 9:30 in an unusual state. Not her normal efficient brisk, but something that on Dana translated roughly as flustered. She had her phone out. "Did you know," Dana said, setting her coffee down without looking at where she was setting it, "that the medical network that owns this clinic was just acquired, bought out? The whole thing." "I saw the email," Kezia said. She had. She'd read it twice, worried briefly about her job, then filed it under things to deal with when they became actual problems. "Do you know who bought it?" "Whitmore Capital," Kezia said. She'd gotten that far in the email. Dana turned her phone around and showed Kezia the screen. It was a business news article. There was a photo. The man in the photo was wearing a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Kezia's rent, and he was at some kind of press event, and he was shaking hands with a city councilor she recognized from the news. His name was in the caption. Cole Whitmore, CEO, Whitmore Capital. He had the same gray eyes. Kezia looked at the photo for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay." Dana stared at her. "Okay? He's basically our boss now. He's a billionaire." "I heard you," Kezia said, and went back to the intake forms. She felt for the rest of that day like the floor had shifted slightly under her. Not dramatically, she wasn't the type for dramatic, but she kept returning to it. The soaked canvas jacket, the broken zippered backpack, the weak coffee she'd brought him without being asked, and the way he'd said thank you, like he'd forgotten someone might just do that without wanting something in return. He'd known, every time he walked through that door, exactly what she didn't know. She tried to be fair about it. There was no reason he had to announce himself. Patients didn't owe medical staff their financial statements. He'd never said anything explicitly false, but she kept coming back to the backpack, and the look on his face the first morning, standing in the doorway, like he was testing something, like someone who had gotten so used to people behaving a certain way once they knew who he was, that he'd needed to see what happened when they didn't. And she'd brought him bad coffee and given him a straight answer about pride, and apparently that had been interesting enough to sustain 12 clinic visits. She thought, I was an experiment. And then she thought, I need to not jump to conclusions. And then she thought about it for the rest of the week and landed somewhere complicated. He came in the following Monday. She'd had the weekend to settle into something that felt, if not resolved, at least steady. He came to the counter. He started to say something about a follow-up appointment, she said quietly, not looking up. I know who you are. A pause. Ah, he said. Dana showed me the article. I see. She looked up then. He was doing the thing where his face went very still, and she knew now that this was what he did when he was waiting to find out which version of a situation he was in. I'm not angry, she said, which surprised him enough that his expression shifted slightly. I haven't decided what I am yet, but I wanted you to know that I know, because I think you should have told me. He was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said. She hadn't expected that immediately. Most people, in her experience when caught in something uncomfortable, started explaining first. He hadn't. Can I tell you why I didn't? He said. You can try, she said. He looked at the counter, then back at her. When people know who I am, he said, they stop being themselves. They're either trying to get something or they're trying to impress me, and I stopped being able to tell the difference years ago. I came in here soaking wet because my flight got canceled, and my assistant had the week off, and I couldn't figure out how to make a clinic appointment through the regular system without having someone do it for me." He paused. That last part is embarrassing to say out loud. Kezia looked at him. "So you gave yourself a week of being a regular person," she said. "I thought it was going to be one appointment." "And then?" He met her eyes. "And then you brought me coffee and told me things that were true without worrying about whether I wanted to hear them, and I kept coming back." Kezia was quiet for a moment. The phone rang, and she let it go to the answering service, which she almost never did. "I like you," she said finally. "I was starting to like you quite a lot, actually, and I'm trying to figure out how to feel about the fact that the whole time, the ground wasn't level." "It wasn't," he said, "and I'm sorry. You can't just say that and have it be done." "I know," she nodded. "Okay," she said. "I have patience to check in." He stood there for a moment. "Can I ask one thing?" "Go ahead." "If I had walked in here in a suit first day, what would have happened?" She thought about it honestly. "You'd have been patient 47. I'd have given you the intake forms and told you the doctor was running behind." He nodded like that was what he'd expected. "But that still doesn't make it okay," she said. "Knowing that, it doesn't make it okay." "No," he said. "It doesn't." She didn't speak to him again that day. But she thought about the question on the drive home. Borrowed Darnell's car, her Civic still being coaxed back to life by the mechanic. And she thought about the man who had enough money to buy the building she worked in, but who hadn't known how to make a clinic appointment on his own, and about the gray eyes that had looked so surprised when someone did something ordinary and kind. It didn't make it simple, but it made it more complicated than just anger, and she'd been raised to be honest with herself about complicated things. She called her best friend Amara that evening, who lived in Calgary now, and who she spoke to on the phone every Sunday, except this week she didn't wait until Sunday. "You have a work thing," Amara said immediately. Amara could always tell. "Sort of," Kezia said. "More of situation." She told her the whole thing. Amara was quiet all the way through, which was rare. "Okay," Amara said when she finished. "Two separate questions. Do you like him?" "I think so." "Yes. And do you trust him?" Kezia stared at the ceiling of her apartment. Through the wall, she could hear her upstairs neighbor starting dinner, the familiar sound of pots. "I don't know yet," she said. "I know I trusted who I thought he was. I need to figure out if that's the same person." "Those are two different questions," Amara said. "I know, Kez. You brought a stranger coffee in the rain. I bring everyone coffee. You bring some people coffee. The ones who look like they need it." Amara paused. "He looked like he needed it. That doesn't mean. I'm not saying it means anything. I'm just saying, the version of him you saw, he didn't perform that. That was him deciding to be himself when no one knew who he was. That's usually closer to real than the other way around." Kezia thought about that for a long time after they hung up. She didn't make any decisions that night. She made tea and helped Darnell work through a practice application essay about his mother, and went to bed early and lay awake for a while anyway, the way she always did when something was sitting unsettled in her. Cole didn't come to the clinic the next week, or the week after that. She told herself she wasn't thinking about it, which was almost true. Then, on a Wednesday morning in December, there was a voicemail from a number she didn't recognize. And it was from someone named Gwen, who said she was calling on behalf of Cole Whitmore, and that he understood if Kezia didn't want to speak to him, and that he wasn't going to come to the clinic again without being asked, but that he wanted her to know he'd arranged for the university's engineering program to review Darnell's file with the additional context about their mother's illness, and that someone named Dr. Osi in the admissions office would be in touch. Kezia listened to the voicemail twice. Then she sat for 5 minutes not doing anything. Then she called the number back. Not Gwen's line, but the direct number Cole had included at the end in his own voice, slightly less steady than his usual voice, like he'd recorded it twice, and this was the second take. He picked up on the second ring. "I didn't ask you to do that," she said. Darnell would want to get in on his own. He will be. I just made sure someone actually read the context. That's different from opening a door for him. It's making sure the door was actually being looked at. His file does the rest." Kezia closed her eyes. "You could have asked me first." "I could have," he said. "I should have. I'm still figuring out what's mine to do and what isn't." "That's a real answer," she said. "I'm trying," he said. Silence. Outside her window, the street was white and quiet, the first real snow of the season, the kind that muffled the city into something that almost felt peaceful. "I'm not going to tell you I forgive you," she said. Because I haven't decided yet, and I'm not going to say it until I mean it. Okay. But I think... She stopped. Tried again. I think you're a different person than you were pretending to be. And I think maybe that's the problem. You were pretending to be a version of yourself you actually want to be, and then you have to go back to being the other one. A long pause. That's the most accurate thing anyone's ever said to me, he said quietly. I know, she said. I pay attention. She heard him exhale, not quite a laugh, something adjacent to it. I noticed. I'm going to think about things, she said. I'm not making any decisions right now, and you have to be okay with that. I am, he said. Take whatever time you need, and if I decide I don't want to, then you don't, he said. That's yours. She believed him. She wasn't sure how, but she did. She hung up and stood at the window for a while and watched the snow, and thought about what Amara had said about the version of himself he was when no one knew who he was, and thought about Darnell's face if he got that phone call from Dr. Osei, and thought about all the ways she'd talked herself out of things over the years because she couldn't afford to be wrong. She thought. What does it cost to try? She thought. Plenty, which was also true. She thought. But not everything. It took her 2 weeks. 2 weeks of ordinary things. Work, the rink with Darnell on Sunday, a phone call with Amara, the slow and slightly exciting process of her Civic being declared roadworthy again, and somewhere inside all of that, something settled. Not certainty, which she'd given up expecting, but something solid enough to stand on. She called him on a Sunday evening. He picked up in one ring, which told her he'd been waiting, which told her something about him too. I want to start over, she said. Not pretend the other part didn't happen, but start fresh from where we actually are. I'd like that, he said, and the steadiness in his voice had something under it that sounded, for the first time, like relief. And you have to answer my questions, she said. All of them, even the ones that are uncomfortable. Agreed. And I'm not going to be different around you, she said. If that's not what you want, it's exactly what I want, he said. She thought about the first morning. The soaking jacket, the careful stillness, the genuine surprise at being brought a cup of bad coffee. She thought about a man rich enough to own the building she worked in, who had come through the door looking like someone who just needed someone to notice he wasn't okay. She had noticed. She thought maybe that was where the real story started. Okay, she said, Sunday. Victoria Park, skating. You own proper skates? A pause. I'll figure it out. She smiled at the wall. Good, she said. Dress for the cold. And outside the window of her Garneau apartment, with the Edmonton winter pressing white and clean against the glass, Kezia Voss thought, this is the part where things either go very right or very wrong, and I'm going to find out which. And for the first time in a long time, she thought maybe that was okay.